You're listening to Talk Radio 1190. This is the Ask the Experts radio show. I'm John Wolf, and I have a great guest with me here today. It's something that every homeowner needs to know about. Darrin Saffell, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, John. How about you?
Great. Thank you for coming in. Darrin has a business, Olympic Restoration. Their website is olympicrestoration.com. Their phone number, 888-756-5967. Again, 888-756-5967. And you're going to tell us everything anyone could ever know about mold.
That's right. Actually, probably not, but we'll hit some highlights.
Okay. How did you get into the business, and then just dive in and tell us a little bit about where we are in the world of the scary world of mold.
Okay. All right. Well, as far as how I got in the business, it's a longer story than I probably want to tell,
Okay.
but I went from the corporate world, started my own business, like helping people, went into restoration, water, fire, mold restoration, and quickly found that mold remediation was kind of our niche market that suited us as a company, and we got to help a lot of people in the process, and so that's kind of how we dove into it. And there are a lot of facts, and there's a lot of untrue facts out there. And there's facts, and there's
The
incorrect,
fake mold
right
information.
things. So hopefully we'll dispel some of those myths today and answer any questions people may have.
Okay, well, I remember back, I guess about 15 years ago or so, mold was the four-letter word. It was what everybody feared to hear. It was worse than foundation problems. And people were spending, it seemed, the same amount that their house was worth just to get the mold remediation, just to get the mold cleaned up. How bad is the situation now, and how do you handle your normal problem, your usual problems?
Okay, yeah, there was a lot happening back in the 90s and the early 2000s. Probably some misuse of insurance funds, but also a lot of scare out there because there was some documented cases of some people who at least mold was a factor in their death. And so there became a huge scare about it. But it is now regulated by the state, the Texas Department of Licensing and Registration. It's a licensed profession, as is like plumbing or electrical type work. And so a lot of the scary things, tactics that people may have used in the past are pretty much gone now. There's, of course, companies that aren't licensed that might be out there doing some odd stuff. But for the most part, I'd say it's a lot better industry than what it was. And there are some real effects from mold. And so it's just the point is really to educate people on what can happen if mold is in their house.
Okay. If I'm looking under my kitchen sink and I realized maybe there was a drip there or some water had leaked in there and it looks like some sort of black mold under there, how do I know that I cannot just, if I can or cannot get away with just having the handyman come and clean it up, maybe throw some baby powder on it to dry it up, or if I better get this ripped up because if I don't, a year from now, I'm going to be in serious problems.
Okay, yeah, so, and that's actually, there's more to that question than you may realize. At a very simplistic level, the Texas rules and regulations say if there is more than 25 contiguous square feet of visible mold growth, then it has to follow the rules and regulations, and that means you have to hire a licensed mold remediation contractor to perform that remediation. If it's less than that, you can hire whoever you want, but there are still a lot of good reasons why you might still want to hire a professional, and I can go into kind of the differences or the details that a professional would go into that somebody who wasn't might not. But then also, in the particular case of a cabinet, it's really hard to tell what's behind the cabinet, how extensive is it, because if it's just dripping on the base of the cabinet, you might have a little area that looks like mold growth there, but it could, and that could be all of it, or it could have a lot of mold underneath because the water sat below the cabinet and affected all the materials underneath.
It's kind of like teeth in a way, you know. Is that just a little something that you need to clean off? Or so if you looked under your cabinet and you saw, let's say the wood was kind of damp, but you were trying to save costs but not be stupid about it, would you still call if you weren't the mold guru yourself?
Right. So and there's a big difference here. So if the wood was damp, like, I think this drip just started and it's a pretty new problem, then yes. So the first thing you want to do is get that dry. So that mold growth doesn't start. But it only takes 48 to 72 hours for mold to start to colonize, which just means grow. And so if it's been going on for a while, there's a good chance, especially if it has soaked through that base layer into more of the cabinet, there's a good chance that there is mold growth there. And so particularly with a cabinet, I would say the best thing is to call a professional. But if we just backed up and said, hey, I have a little section on my front living room wall, and it looks like it's maybe a 1-by-1 area, and I'm not sure why it's there. Maybe water's coming in from the outside, that the soil's too high around the foundation, so a little bit of water's coming that way, or it's leaked in around a window. Then that's where it becomes more less defined on if you really need a professional because of the details and the trickiness of the situation. But here's what you should keep in mind. If you hire a mold remediation company, then there's a lot of steps that they perform. And the first is setting up containment. And containment just means that they're separating the area where they're going to remove mold from the rest of the house. And the thing is, if you can see it, then that means there's millions of spores, because mold is microscopic, right? So if you can actually see it with your eyes, then that means there's just really hundreds of thousands of spores there, so that built up enough so you could actually see it. And what can happen is if you go to remove that, then you disturb those spores and they get released into the air. They just float. They're really light, so they'll float in the air and they can spread to other locations. And so it's really important to contain that area first. And then a professional company will also create what we call negative air pressure inside the contained area. And all that means is there's a machine with a HEPA filter, which will capture mold particles out of the air, but it's ducted out of the house, and that creates a vacuum inside that contained area. And the reason for that, the reason why that's important, is so that if you were, let's say you have a door in your contained area, so you can go in and out of that, where you're working and the rest of the house. If you open the door and you don't have that negative air pressure, everything that's in the containment can follow you out into the house. But if you have a negative air pressure, it's basically trying to suck air in to that environment. And so if you open the door, it's drawing air in from the house rather than releasing it from the containment into the rest of the house. And this particular piece of equipment is fairly expensive, and so most handyman or other type companies won't have this equipment with the HEPA filter in it. And then, of course, the cleaning is much more detailed, and down to HEPA vacuuming, wiping with an antimicrobial. I mean, almost to the point where you can eat off of it when it's complete. Just about.
I'm going to pause for a second because I know people jump in and out of their cars listening to the radio. Again, we're speaking with Darrin Saffell of Olympic Restoration, and their website, olympicrestoration.com. Their phone number, 888-756-5967, 888-756-5967. What do you feel, you've had your company 13 years, you told me off air, what do you feel makes Olympic Restoration better than the rest?
Well, we think that it's because we really want to do a good job. We care about our customers. That's one of the things that motivates us. We want our mission statement is to help our customers have healthier homes and lives. And the reason how we have them have healthier lives is because the work that we do truly impacts the environment in which they live, which allows them to live without these contaminants and things that could have harmful health effects.
Okay, if you have one of those serious situations and you're sealing off that room and moving everything outside as far as the airflow, I assume you have to close off any vents that go to that room?
Absolutely, yes. You seal those off as well, so there's no airflow from the HVAC system. You certainly don't want the HVAC system sucking air out of it. And you don't want it blowing back in there too. We have to do all the measures to prevent cross-contamination with other areas. And that's just critical. And it's amazing what a difference it can be. So if you just had let's say it was a 1 square foot piece of drywall, just a small piece that had mold on it. But if you walk through the house with that open, it will literally put thousands of spores into the air. And we know that just because we have followed companies that have taken it out without safety precautions, and an air sample was taken in the rest of the house in the path in which they walked, and it was just amazingly high of the spore count. And the rest of the house did not have a mold issue. This, in one case I'm thinking of, it was pretty much a brand new house, and they'd had a roof issue in one area and caused a leak, and they cut it out and carried it out, and it really contaminated their house with the air in their house.
Okay, several years ago, we had a leak in an upstairs toilet, and it had soaked into the ceiling on the first floor. And is that something, and frankly, I don't remember if we addressed a potential mold problem or not. We were just getting the ceiling fixed and the toilet fixed. Is that a situation where you really should have a mold person come in, such as from Olympic Restoration?
Yes, and most likely, yes. Again, it depends on timing. So if you had a toilet that leaked and it was the same day and you had a company come out and dry it professionally so that it didn't stay wet for 3 days or more, then you probably got by and didn't have mold start to grow. But if it was something where your toilet was leaking and maybe didn't even notice it for a while, and then all of a sudden you realized, oh, what's going on here? What's that spot on the ceiling?
Right.
Or why is all the floor loose underneath the toilet? Then yes, definitely you'd want a professional in that situation.
Okay, and in our situation, they told us not to speak to the insurance company, frankly. They said you could say the one wrong thing because you don't understand, and it could really affect your claim. And so do you deal with the insurance as well?
We do, and I'd say that there's only a small percentage of insurance companies that cover mold. A lot of them have a $5,000. The ones who do cover it have like a $5,000 mold policy, and so yeah, it kind of depends on the insurance company. Most of them have water damage coverage, and so if you have a water issue, then they will pay to dry and replace, the affected areas. But if it comes down to the mold remediation, where you need air scrubbers and containment and HEPA vacuuming, antimicrobial cleanup, then it gets covered by the insurance company if you have mold coverage.
Gotcha. And otherwise, is the $5,000 part of the water damage, or is that a deductible on any mold work?
No, it's a separate policy specifically for mold, so it's not a deductible. It's how much they would pay.
Gotcha.
And so if it only costs $3,500, they pay all of it. But if it costs $10,000, they would pay $5,000 of the $10,000.
Okay, and there's no like infrared glasses you can put on to see if mold spores are floating through the air behind you?
Not exactly like that, but there is. And without boring the audience too much, the rules and regulations, there's a license for inspection and testing, and there's a license for remediation, which is the removal and cleaning. And you can't do both on the same job. There are some companies that hold both licenses, but typically you have one or the other. But the companies that do inspection and testing have methods of sampling the air. So they'll take an air sample inside the house or inside the area that you're concerned about, and one outside, and they'll compare those two samples. And if the spore count inside the house is greater than outside, or if there's different kinds of mold inside than outside, then you would be indicated that there's a problem inside the house.
Very good. Well, thank you, and we'll be right back. We're speaking with Darrin Saffell of Olympic Restoration, olympicrestoration.com. Again, the phone number, 888-756-5967. I'm John Wolf with Talk Radio 1190. And you're listening to Talk Radio 1190. I'm John Wolf with the Ask the Experts radio show. And our expert this week, Darrin Saffell of olympicrestoration.com. Well, of Olympic Restoration, that's their website, obviously. 888-756-5967 is their number. 888-756-5967. We're talking about mold remediation specifically. If you do have a big problem, how long is the house ever need to be evacuated totally, or is it usually just a part of the house, and for how long?
Typically, it's just a part of the house, and so it's very situational. Depends on how much of the house is affected. For instance, in the hurricane in Houston this past year, the floodwaters came up. The whole bottom of the house had to come out in a lot of cases, and so in that case, all the contents have to come out. But in most cases where it's one room that's affected, maybe two rooms, then the contents sometimes have to be cleaned, but sometimes they just need to be moved to another area. And so it greatly depends on the mold levels inside the air and how many areas are affected, and kind of and sometimes it's situational based on the people, because some people are much more sensitive to mold growth. They have their body is impacted more greatly than other people's, and so they want a more detailed cleaning in that case.
And I'm thinking, because water being the cause, that the kitchen, is that the most likely place, or really just wherever pipes go through?
Every place where there could be water, which could be the bathroom, like we talked about, the toilet, the kitchen, the shower, ice maker lines, washing machine, dishwasher. Yeah, every water hookup is a potential
I'm never
area.
going home again.
Right.
All right, now if you have mold in a crawl space, is that a special situation that you just can't see well enough if you're in there, if you're not a professional, and you better get Darrin in there?
Well, that is a little bit different situation. Some people believe that if it's in their crawl space, then it doesn't affect them at all. Do they even need to? Some people will say, do I even need to mess with it? Don't all crawl spaces have mold? And the answer is a lot of them have it, but they shouldn't. And if we go back to, which I never really said, the purpose of mold in nature is to decompose fallen trees and leaves. So it's kind of recycles the earth, but it does that exact thing to your building materials. So if you just take away any potential health effects, it actually is using the building materials in your home as a food source. And so if you have mold in your crawl space, it is actually decomposing that wood. And so for that reason alone, you want to get rid of it. Now, to further this, though, there's a process in buildings where air flows from the bottom to the top. It's called the stack effect. And so it's always pulling from below and going up. And because of that process, up to 50% of the air in a pier and beam home, inside the home, can come from the crawl space. And so really what's down there that you think is not a big deal, you may not think it's a big deal, in terms including rodents and anything they leave
That's
behind.
a big deal.
Yeah,
That's a
mold,
big
it's
deal.
coming right up into your house. And so it really is a big deal that needs to be addressed.
And snakes, too.
And
There's a lot of
snakes.
problems in the suburbs with snakes.
Yeah, we hope we don't run across those. We do occasionally, though.
And what would you say is the average, if there is any such thing, on how long it takes, how many days that room's fairly unusable?
So that's a really tough question, but let's keep it very simple. Let's say it is actually just one room.
Okay.
Then it depends on the way it would work is the remediation company would come in, set up containment, do all the process, and that might be 1 or 2 days of work. But then those air filtration devices that create the negative air pressure,
Right.
they are literally cleaning the air inside that containment. So every 15 minutes they're cycling all the air in there, and so it's just filtering out any spores that have floated into the air. And so that process happens generally for about 48 hours. And then when that has happened, the licensed mold assessment consultant, so that's the person licensed for inspection and testing, will come out, do a visual inspection of the area, take their samples so they can verify analytically that there's not mold in there. And if it passes those two, which it usually takes a couple of days to get those results, sometimes 1 day, then you can come take the containment down. So realistically, even though the work might be 1 or 2 days, it's probably a 5-day process for a fairly simple remediation job.
Are people kind of on edge once they've had this work done that the mold's going to come back? The mold's going to come back. I don't want to tear up my floors again or cabinets again, but how do I know that everything's okay since, as I say, you can't see the spores on a microscope?
Yeah, some people are. And the one thing that is actually really good with there's a lot of things that are really good about the regulations in Texas, but the fact that it's required that another company come out and do an assessment of the remediation company's work, when they do that, and they verify that it has been cleared, then the customer actually gets a certificate, and it's an official state document. It's called a Certificate of Mold Damage Remediation that says both the inspector and the remediation company agree that they've performed the work here, it's been performed correctly, and it passes the clearance. And that paper certifies for potential buyers, for the insurance company, maybe for renters if you have a investment property. And so that's a very valuable piece of paper that kind of gives everybody peace of mind that says, yeah, okay, I did have a problem, but I took care of it properly, and here's my proof.
And they're probably selling their house the next week anyway. So
Maybe not.
oh,
yeah.
I don't remember that mold problem from last week.
Right.
Now, you mentioned that some people are more susceptible to illness, to allergies from this. Do you think there are people out there who are going to their doctor for all sorts of things, and in reality it's not something from within their body, it's mold from within their house?
Unfortunately, that does happen sometimes. The thing about mold is no matter what your sensitivity level is, it does increase over time. So if you allow yourself to be in the presence of this mold over time, and if it's a high enough quantity, it starts to affect you more and faster. And so, yeah, there are people who have got to that point, and a lot of times it is in their home and they just don't know it, and it doesn't, and they haven't heard much about mold remediation, and they know that every time they go home, they start to feel funny or different or not so good. But a lot of times it takes a while for them to say, I'm just exhausted from the end of the day or something like that, and they start to associate, maybe there's a problem in my home. And so, yeah, that does actually happen sometimes.
And how easily can you come in and just check if you don't see anything wet or black mold or whatever?
Yeah, so in that case, you would hire a licensed mold assessment consultant, the person licensed for inspection and testing, and they can take the air samples in the home, they can take surface samples. If there's a suspicious wall, they can actually draw air from the wall cavity and and extract that, and they send these samples into a laboratory, which then analyze them and determine if there really is mold and the quantity of mold. And the thing that then becomes a little tricky, sometimes it's high, like you don't see mold anywhere in the house, but it comes back with very high results of the mold spore counts. And so then you know there's a problem and you have to figure out where the problem is. But sometimes it comes back as a relatively low level, and then it comes down to the individual. Is it because they are more sensitive to mold spores, or is it something else in the home? And it could be VOCs from new carpet or from furniture, other things that off-gas that can also affect people's health.
Can people hire you to come out and take a look at a home before they buy it to see if there's something they're just missing?
Yes, and that's actually a good practice to do that, definitely.
Okay. How can people find out more about mold remediation if they're not too afraid to look?
And really, people do not need to be afraid, because it actually is in almost all cases, the mold can be taken care of. I say relatively painlessly. It does involve removing materials in most cases, and so there is some destructive measure to it, but it's usually not the seriousness or maybe even the cost that some people think, because some people have these huge numbers in their head, and it's not outrageous. I mean, it is a service and it does add up. But,
sure.
But a way to find out more information would be to go to our website, olympicrestoration.com/radio. And what we're going to do is we're going to post a list of links there to other websites that have information that might be valuable to the listeners.
Very good. And again, we're speaking with Darrin Saffell of olympicrestoration.com as their website, Olympic Restoration, or give him a call. He seems like a nice guy. 888-756-5967, 888-756-5967. Now, the question I have for you as we get towards the end of the show is, what have I not asked you that I should have?
You've covered a lot of things, John, and I think we may have just barely hit the surface, and so people may have a lot more questions just from what we've touched on. We've hit a lot of different areas. I think one of the things that people ask me a lot, though, is, can I just put bleach on it? Because for years, people have just put bleach on it. And here's the thing, is when you put bleach on something, it looks like it works, because you spray it on there and all of a sudden you don't see the mold anymore. But what it literally is doing is it's bleaching the mold. Just like it bleaches your whites and it takes the stains out, it bleaches the mold. Bleach is not certified it's not certified by the EPA as an antimicrobial, so we don't know that it kills mold. But it discolors it so you don't see it anymore. And even if it did, then dead mold spores can also have harmful health effects just like live ones. In fact, the body doesn't really discern between dead and alive. They don't grow if they're dead, just like if you have a seed to plant anything. If it's dead or benign, denatured, it doesn't grow, but it's still a seed.
Right. So it's don't go with the effect of turning up the car radio if you hear something rattling inside the car. You can do it, but it's just not going to do any good.
That's right. Exactly.
You could fool yourself if you've got a big party coming up that day and you don't want Grandma going, "Oh, I think I see mold here."
Right.
Use the bleach, but then call Darrin and have Olympic Restoration come on. Well, it's been great having you with us, and
Thank you.
I've learned more about it. And yes, it's a scary thing, and I don't want to see it when I go home. But if I do, I know that it's not going to go away it probably doesn't cure itself, does it?
That's right. No.
No suicide mold spores. We need somebody experienced and licensed to come out there, and that would be Darrin of Olympic Restoration at olympicrestoration.com. Learn more about it, or call Darrin at 888-756-5967, 888-756-5967. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have
And
a
you've
good
been
day.
listening to Ask the Experts radio show at Talk Radio 1190. Thank you very much.